I'm Aishah Ali, and this is my poem, Elevator Questions You Can Ask Other Than the Weather. So elevator questions you can ask other than the weather came around when I first started in the corporate world, and I was stuck in elevators with people and I hated small talk. And I have this, innate desire to be radically candid, even if it borderlines on uncomfortable just a little bit, because I think we need a little bit of discomfort to connect better. I was really inspired by Banu Kapil, who's this Indian British poet, and she has this incredible poem called 12 Questions in her book, The Vertical Interrogation of Strangers. And it's like 12 really intense questions. And I've used that specific poem as a lot of prompts in workshops, and that poem inspired this poem. Like everything that I do, there's the layer of interrogating, our sense of connection, but also there's a sense of colonialism in it. There's themes of mental health. There's themes of self-flagellation, which is another recurring theme that I have in a lot of my poetry. I've realized now as an adult, which is being really self-critical, familiar relationships. So all of that kind of feeds into the tapestry of the poem naturally. When I wrote it, I was going through this really introspective journey with myself as a, visibly Muslim lawyer in the corporate world, as a visibly Muslim woman in a household where I still felt like a child. And so I was kind of battling a lot of these things internally in my mind. But as time has kind of flowed, a lot of the things that I was talking about manifested into reality. So a lot of the struggles I talked about with whose lover's lines are going to be on your lips. I did not know that I was going to go through a divorce, get married and go through a divorce after that and have to ruminate on things that have been said to me. So in a weird way, it's become prophetic. But a lot of the things I also ask in there have also helped me connect with people better and myself better. So I feel there's a timelessness to it. It shows that we can be vulnerable with ourselves and each other in a way that feels tender and appreciative of the things that happen in our lives, but also, let us get cuts a little bit deeper than just how are you, a how are you sentence. Yeah. So Rumi says, you have to keep breaking your heart until it opens. Elevator questions you can ask other than the weather. 1. What need is there to injure your body after it is already carcass? 2. Whose sadness did you carry yesterday, and to whom will you deliver it tomorrow? 3. Why do you preach of honey and then slander the bees? The first line, I think, kind of hits this ache that I've had throughout most of my life, which is being intensely harsh on myself. And I think it's an ethnic daughter thing, it's an eldest daughter thing. The need to still be so self-critical no matter what stage of life you're in. And I still feel that way till now in so many aspects. And so this feeling of if you don't achieve perfection in your life, you're going to keep that level of self-mutilation in a way until you get there. And then you get so used to being self-hating that it's you don't know how to function without, constantly criticizing yourself. So the second line is, I think, the way that we talk about trauma and how, when you see people and you see how it manifests in them, we don't look at things in isolation. We should see things in totality, right? So we were having this conversation beforehand where you might see someone excessively exercising and you're like, oh my God, they're really fit, but you don't know what they're projecting it into. And I've had many phases where I've been overworking myself, and the overworking is a form of my sadness manifesting because it doesn't know what to do other than to be productive. And when you go into a relationship or you're going into work or even when you go into a friendship and you receive stuff from people, they're going through something, you have to be so cognizant of not projecting your own sadness onto them. And I've realized that more and more in my own mental health journey where I've wanted to look for someone to support and they're not giving it to me. And instead of me being why aren't they giving it to me? I'm they can only meet me where they're at. What I realized when I started writing was there's a lot of dichotomous things we're taught, particularly in culture, about self-protection about the people that you look to for wisdom and advice, and the things that they tell you that don't necessarily make sense in application. Like supporting people in mental health, but don't talk about mental health, or don't talk about if you have depression or if you're going through anxiety or even like suicide, for example. Those things are like seen but not heard. And so in community and in culture, a lot of the reverence that we give to people who hold positions of power are telling us like, you can do this, but you can't do that. And we'll like the same thing that happens to people as like, visibly Muslim women in like the corporate world where, you're seen but not heard. So like represent us, but don't show too much of your identity where it becomes uncomfortable. That's kind of where the people preach of honey. So they want something that's, esteemed, and they'll slander you if you actually step outside of the line. Number 4, how are you grown up still letting people down? 5, why do you not call upon God? Do you know that to not bless is to curse? 6, why do you call yourself wound? Do you know that to praise is to give power? 7, whom will you love and how will you arrive at their feet? Something that's kind of gone through the trajectory of my work as well is our relationship as children of migrants, feeling like you're perpetually inadequate. And you might like try and achieve a certain level of like semblance in your family household of peace and like concord and collegiality. Like it's almost like a workplace sometimes, but you still feel like you're deficient no matter how old you get. And I think when you're young, you're like, no, when I'm older, it'll be better. When I'm older, it'll be better. When I'm older, it'll make sense. But then you get older and you still feel like you are letting them down. And so the first one is literal in that way, but I think it's specifically for children of immigrants because we have that, I think, perpetual anxiety. As hopeful as I want to be, I feel like that kind of just, that stays. And so it's not about the feeling going away, it's about maybe you changing to cope with that feeling. That's the only like medium or like variable that can change, but the letting down bit, I feel like that's kind of, it's a forever feeling. I think I'm the addressee of the poem. I think a lot of the poem I'm speaking to myself. How am I grown up and still letting people down? It could definitely be put to other people in your life who you've kind of held in like a high regard, and they are still falling short every single time you need them to show up. My household has always been a really strict religious household. And so when you're young, you have this concept of like, if you don't be appreciative of things, like if you're not appreciative of God, if you're not appreciative of like the blessings that you're given, you're almost cursing the blessings that you're given. And I always took kind of like a beauty to it, which is, I think, not having a sense of like appreciation and contextual understanding of your life will make you become really ungrounded. And so even while in different points of my life that I've like suffered through certain things, I'm like, contextualize your life. Like you do have family, you do have friends, you have like, a healthcare system, like you're not a country going through a genocide. Like imagine having all this ache and then, there's like suffering happening in the world. So not to, belittle your own self, but don't curse your blessings, and I've like kind of carried that throughout my life. My dad's been really instrumental in like keeping that tie in my life, which is constantly be thankful. Not in a way that feels so pandery, but in a way that centers you. The last one is, why do you call yourself, to call yourself wound is almost to praise yourself and to give yourself power. And I think as women, we have this, I'm not going to generalize, I'll just say myself. I think there's this bond that you develop with like the worst parts of yourself. You have this like allegiance to the pain kind of attitude sometimes. And sometimes your wounds become the only place where you can find creativity from, or you can find like connection from. And I've been really, as I've gotten older, realized that my wounds don't have to be the forefront of my identity. Like it's okay that I can connect with people over matcha, or I can connect with people over, really human things. Not that trauma isn't a human thing, but really natural things. It doesn't have to be the front foot that I put in. But as a young girl, I didn't understand that. So like anytime I would try and bond with anyone, it would be like, do you also have really strict religious parents? Or like, oh, do you also XYZ? Or, and that being the gateway to a bond is not, it's kind of like a Stockholm syndrome too. You end up stuck in certain relationships out of convenience, or even friendships out of convenience, because you're like, no, we've gone through this, you know, really similar thing together. So the same way you don't want to develop allegiance to your own pain and like overpraise your wound or over exemplify it in your like world, you need to like decenter that so that you can also decenter it in your like, you know, your interpersonal relationships as well. I don't know if you guys have watched Fleabag. It's one of my all-time favorite TV shows. This is just the way that my brain works. So I will watch a scene and I'll see like a confession. Like there was a scene where she was doing like confession with the priest, like the hot priest anyway, obsessed with him. And I will see a question, like I'll see them talking to each other and I'm like, I see a sentence here and I see a sentence here. And I'm like, they're both trying to say something, but they can't, there's a wall between them. They can't actually like read each other because there's a wall between them. And then I'll see a poem, I'll see like a sentence forming in that way. I don't even know how to explain it. That's just the beauty of like art and imagery. But that's why those two sentences make sense that way, because I'd written it after watching that and thinking that I can have these two questions like parallel to each other. Sometimes I'll be working out on the treadmill and I'll be like, I don't know what that sentence is. And a word will come and then the whole sentence will come. And the poem will come in like pieces after. But sometimes I have to sit and do it. And when I sit and do it, it's nowhere good as when it comes like that, which is like really hard. Because
it's always like when you're in a position not to write anything.
Yes.
As well.
Yeah.
No paper, no nothing.
Yeah. And you're sweating and there's like men around you, like they're all like hot and like they're taking off their shirts and you're like, I just want to write my poem on the treadmill. Number 7, whom will you love and how will you arrive at their feet? Number 8, why do you reserve your judgment before you reserve your seats? 9, why do you hold people accountable for your lack of ablution? 10, why do you tell me of your greatest triumph before you tell me of your greatest tragedy? Did you not know that who you are at your lowest defines you more than who you are at your highest? These sets of questions are inspired by like weddings. So during like ethnic weddings, generally, they're usually like really opulent affairs and people will invite heaps of guests and then complain that those guests are like have too many opinions. And my like thing has been like, then just invite less people if you want less opinions. There's this thing that we complain about the way that society or our problems function, but we don't want to take accountable for what we've done to contribute to it. And we would rather have like an over-glamorized like affair, like a wedding, instead of really have an intimate thing with just the people that you love, just for the sake of it. And that's kind of like a microcosm for a lot of things, you know, in the world. I think especially the whom you love, how you arrive at their feet, and why do you reserve your judgment before you reserve. I think that's like a community, like I'm addressing like my cultural community in a way and being like, why is there such a level of hypocrisy in the actions that we're taking to like do things in community and then be angry when like, you know, people have like opinions about it or whatever. There's a lot of like networking events that you have in the corporate world and I hate them. As much as I can, I will not go to a networking event. And I don't think I have ever been one just voluntarily unless I was like performing or like had to do something. I don't enjoy the social climbing and the like reciting your CV to someone. And I just can't I can't meet a person. Like they're not like a real person to me. And so that line, why didn't you tell me of your greatest, you know, your lowest moment before your highest moment was a reflection of that. Like if we could lead with how we were in our lowest, would we do that instead of like where we were in our highest? Because you'd meet people and they'd be like, so I interned here with this barrister and then I did this with this person. And you're like, I know nothing about you or like what your interests are or like, you know, who you are at your core. And I'm like, what would society look like if we could lead with, you know, the intensely vulnerable parts of ourselves instead of the highlight reels of ourselves? And funnily enough, and like that's why I say this piece is so funnily prophetic and timeless. Over the last 6 months when I've gone through like a divorce and depression and been through like this whole like process of suicide and hospitalization, I've realized being intensely vulnerable has helped not just myself, but normalize a lot of these things happening to women. And then on top of that, Muslim women, on top of that, like young Muslim women, and all of that, all these different circles of people that I've managed to reach through being intensely candid, through leading with my lowest, and not in a way that's self-flagellating, not in a way that's like, oh my God, this stuff was just so hard. In a way that's like, no, this is what's happened. This is what I'm trying to do. This is the support I can give. This is support I'm willing to give, and to just normalize it. So not knowing it, I've taken my own advice from like 3 years ago and chucked it into like this context. These things would also be applied to me. Like, am I a judgmental person? Do I reserve my judgment before I reserve my seat? Like, have I already made an assumption about someone before I've even met them? And so sometimes the things that you also might be critiquing other people for, you should be critiquing yourself for too. Number 11, which lover's lines are still on your lips? Number 12, if you don't think you deserve better, would you say the same thing to your mother? Number 13, how much unkindness are you stained in? I think about how sometimes men in particular, they've been either built by another woman, so they've learned from all their mistakes and that's why they are the way that they are, or they've been destroyed by women, which is why they are the way that they are. And I say destroyed in a very light way, actually not in a heavy way. Like, they did something really small and they're like, oh my God, this was like this massive thing that happened to me and now I'm forever a douchebag, which can also happen. The relationships that kind of feed through you are the way that you feed through the world. And to make sure, I think this was a kind of a note to self in a way, like make sure that who you are in the relationships that you take part in are not stained by someone else's lines. That sentence itself was out of like this retrospective jealousy in particular, which is like, whose lover's lines are you already stained in? Like, are you speaking in tones, in phrases that you've already spoken to someone else with? And that in itself is a concept that makes me envious. The next couple, I think, are to do with my relationship with my mum. Banu Kapil's poem does this really well. I think she has a sentence on, what do you remember about the dismemberment of your mother? And when I read that, I like had a whole like moment, like, what do I remember about the dismemberment of my mother? And you think about all the way that your mother might have been disassembled in her whole life, or, you know, not given agency, not given power, or put into a certain dynamic that she didn't want to have, or what opportunities were taken from her, what dreams she had that she couldn't pursue. And when you think about all the unkindness that's happened to a person, you start to develop a lot more empathy for your relationship with them as well. If we don't think that they deserve better, would we say the same thing to ourselves? Because we are going to be them. Not that we're going to be mothers, but we're going to be versions of ourselves that have been through a lot. And would we still hold ourselves to such a harsh light, knowing what we know about our mother? 14. When you were embezzled by empire, did you think you would become a small brown girl at the foot of her bed begging to have her oppressor's blood? 15. Why do you bargain with your tongue? That is to say, where do you bury your honesty? Colonialism was inevitably going to end up in my piece. I think it's something that I think about a lot in my own history. The Fijian Indian population came through basically slavery, or indentured labor. It was labeled as indentured labor, but it was slavery. And I think about how so much of this ache that I had, when I tie it back to this ancestral ache that I've had, I can't seem to still want to have a white life. For a lot of ethnic communities and a lot of ethnic girls, you're like, what would my life look like if I was stripped away from all of my lineage and I had like the, standard basic version of life? And it almost is like it's almost embarrassing to admit that to yourself, especially when you're young. You're like, no, all these things, they give me identity, they give me humor, they give me the character building, they give me depth, they give me principles, they give me values. And yet sometimes you can't help but feel like, damn, my ancestors did all this stuff and suffered and, made it through a lot. And I'm here begging at the foot of my... And I think the begging at the foot of my oppressors came from this feeling at the time, just like performing for white audiences work and performing work that was palatable, and also performing my own identity as a visibly Muslim woman in like white and corporate spaces. Even just small things, like I had remembered I'd gone to Cairns, I think, at this point, and anytime we were around like Aussies, I had to like prove I was like extra Aussie, and like I would like dial up my accent just to prove that I was like, I'm one of you. And I've tried to move past that for a lot of my life now. Like I could care less to prove my identity or prove a version of Australia or an Australianness. I'm like, but that's not even a concept. You know what I mean? Australianness is not even a concept. Then for that context, it was basically about burying the radicalness of my identity, or like the parts of my identity that felt hard to reckon with, which is giving a palatable version of, why we would pray. We'd be like, yeah, we're basically just doing yoga. You know what I mean? Or like trying to connect with people in really superficial ways, like, like I'm Indian and these are like our kinds of food, like making your identity so condensed and sandwich and easy to package and consume instead of the depth it might offer and even the complexity it might offer and even the unknown that it might offer, and embracing it in its wholeness instead of like letting it, be something that's so sandwichable for someone else. And that's kind of where the burying your honesty bit is. Like, why am I biting my tongue so much? It would take me ages. And I was aware that I was a visibly Muslim woman in a corporate world, but it would take me ages to admit that I fast. Like, they know that I do that anyway. Or it would take me ages to be like, yeah, I don't drink. Even though I know some people knew that at some point. And I would be hiding from an identity that I already visibly wear, which is so funny. And so that was where that concept came from. Like, why am I burying so much of my honesty and bargaining with my truth? I think like this poem has felt like a version of mining, right? Like it feels like it's self-mining. It's like a cave. And it starts at the beginning where the cave is you and then the cave is the community. And so I felt like so much of the last bit became like the core of me. We, litters of inherited ache. My dad says what luxury it is to only ever be at war with yourself. I say, accept. Wars end. One of the main things that you have in immigrant families is a lack of appreciation for, your troubles and your worries, because it doesn't seem big enough in comparison to other people's struggles, etc. And so it's like the same thing that you have where you're like, I'm tired to your mum, and they're like, I've been tired for years. The feeling diaspora kids have, which is that our struggles are never gonna compare up to real struggles. Our struggles are never real struggles. By saying wars end, it's not to say that wars end. It is to say that the war with yourself is so continuous, and that the struggle itself is valid on its own. It doesn't need to be compared against like the lineage of ache that's happened before, like dispossession and colonialism and all that. Like this is its own battle, and it's okay for it to be its own battle. So that's why I wanted to end it in a very validating, it might not seem like it, but the tone for me internally was almost validating. Like, yes, this is a war, but it's a war just as any other war that's been faced. Just because it's internal doesn't mean it's any less important. I had to sit outside of so many situations and make myself a fly in the war, like on the wall, but also be really confrontational with myself, because I knew that there was like I knew I was going through retrospective jealousy, like I knew I was going through these things, and I wanted to untangle from like so much of the self-critique, which is why I'm like, if I write about it, it'll be a form of like healing that it's like trying to tell yourself that you're self-aware. You're like, no, I'm self-aware. Like I know. And if I write it down, then it lets me continuously have like an evidence of like growth. Like if I keep looking back at it, maybe I'll improve myself. Like maybe I'll grow as a person. I knew that it was going to be a bit subversive. Like it's not going to be a narrative poem. It's also not going to be a poem that thematically consistently makes sense. But I was okay with that. I was like, in whatever shape or form that it forms into, it'll make sense at the end because it makes sense to me, because I'm the audience. And it was one of the first times where I felt like I was really writing for myself and not for like something that made sense in a wide, like to white people or in a wide audience sense. I didn't want it to be graceful. I wanted it to be intense, because I wanted it to really polarize the way that like a weather question is in an elevator. Like it's so like, so how's the weather? And I'm like, no, I want to like bombard people with feeling, because like sometimes it's like a CPR shock. Like I wanted it to feel like I was so, like if there's a very little pause in the way I perform it, which is why I say maybe I perform it a little bit differently now, just with like pausing to give effect, but not pausing to give them room to breathe. Because I think sometimes it actually is more intentional when you perform to be like boom, 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 and then be like, okay, what did she just say?
I say, accept, wars end. Thank you.